Human beings often like to believe that we are independent thinkers, unique individuals making rational choices. But if we look honestly at how we live, how we fear, how we conform, and how we seek approval, it becomes clear that at our core, we are deeply collectivistic creatures, shaped not only by reason, but by evolution, by survival, and by an ancient herd instinct that long predates modern ideas of freedom and individuality. Because for most of human history, survival depended not on standing out, but on belonging, not on personal expression, but on staying within the safety of the group. And this is why across cultures there is a shared wisdom that the animal that wanders away from the herd becomes the easiest target for the hunter. Not because the animal is weak, but because isolation is dangerous in a hostile world. And this deep evolutionary truth still lives inside us today, quietly shaping our psychology even in modern societies that celebrate independence and individual rights. At the level of biology and evolution, the human nervous system evolved to prioritize group survival over individual preference, because food, protection, reproduction, and knowledge were all collective efforts. And to be rejected by the group meant not emotional discomfort, but death. And so our brains developed powerful mechanisms to seek approval, follow norms, imitate others, and suppress behaviors that might lead to exclusion. And this is why even today, people often conform to social expectations they privately disagree with, why they fear being different, and why belonging often feels more important than truth, even when we consciously value independence. Societies, by their very nature, think in terms of we rather than I, because a society that prioritizes individual desire without regard for group stability cannot survive for long. And this is why collectivistic thinking dominates most civilizations historically, including China, India, Russia, and many traditional cultures, where harmony, obedience, hierarchy, and duty to the group are valued over personal expression, and where the success of the collective is seen as more important than the happiness of any single individual. Because stability, continuity, and survival require coordination, not constant divergence. In Chinese culture, this collectivistic orientation is deeply embedded, not just politically but psychologically and philosophically, emphasizing unity, harmony, and the subordination of individual ego to the needs of the whole. And this creates a society where order and coherence are prioritized, where individuals are less likely to challenge authority openly, and where the group identity is stronger than personal branding. And while this limits individual creativity and dissent, it also creates a sense of stability and shared direction that reduces internal chaos, because fewer people are pulling in opposite directions at the same time. India presents a more complex and conflicted picture, because while its cultural roots are deeply collectivistic, emphasizing family, caste, community, and social duty, it simultaneously embraces democratic and individualistic ideals inherited from modern political systems. And this creates a constant tension between we and I, between obedience and expression, between tradition and personal freedom. And this unresolved contradiction often results in social chaos, identity confusion, and political fragmentation, because the psychological foundation of the society is pulled in two opposing directions at once without a clear integration of the two. The United States represents perhaps the most dramatic experiment in individualism, where personal freedom, self-expression, human rights, and individual success are elevated to almost sacred values, and this ideology has undeniably fueled innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and scientific advancement. Because when individuals are encouraged to think independently, challenge authority, and pursue personal vision, new ideas emerge that would be suppressed in rigid hierarchical systems. And this is why so many breakthroughs in art, technology, and culture arise from societies that protect individual expression. However, this individualistic ideology sits uneasily on top of an evolutionary mind that is still fundamentally collectivistic, and this creates deep internal conflict, because while people are told to prioritize themselves, their nervous systems still crave belonging, shared identity, and group coherence. And when a society emphasizes diversity without cultivating unity, the result is not harmony, but fragmentation. Because diversity alone does not create peace, and without shared values or a common sense of we, differences become sources of conflict rather than enrichment. This is why in highly individualistic societies like the United States, we often see intense polarization, identity battles, and cultural fragmentation, because the collective glue that binds people together has weakened, and individuals are left navigating a complex social landscape without a strong sense of shared purpose, leading to anxiety, isolation, and constant competition for attention, validation, and recognition. And this is further amplified by media systems that reward outrage, sensationalism, and division, because conflict captures attention more effectively than coherence. In contrast, in more collectivistic societies like China and Russia, fame and recognition are more often attributed to the group, the nation, or the institution rather than the individual, and success is framed as a collective achievement rather than a personal triumph. And while this suppresses individual stardom, it reinforces unity and shared identity, reducing internal dissent at the cost of personal freedom. And this trade-off reflects a fundamental tension between creativity and stability, innovation and order, individuality and survival. Media plays a crucial role in shaping how these dynamics unfold, because media does not simply reflect reality, it amplifies certain narratives while silencing others. And in highly individualistic societies, media often fuels chaos by rewarding extreme opinions, personal branding, and emotional reactions, while in collectivistic societies, media can create complacency by limiting dissent and reinforcing official narratives. And in both cases, some level of restraint is necessary, not to suppress truth, but to prevent the destabilization of society through constant psychological stimulation and fear. Creativity and innovation flourish in environments that allow individuals to challenge norms, question authority, and think independently. But survival and stability depend on cooperation, shared rules, and collective discipline. And when a society leans too heavily in either direction, imbalance arises because pure collectivism suffocates creativity, while pure individualism erodes cohesion. And the challenge for modern civilization is not to choose one over the other, but to integrate both in a way that honors human nature in its full complexity. In everyday life, we see this tension constantly when someone wants to pursue a unique path but fears family judgment, when an employee has a creative idea but hesitates to challenge corporate hierarchy, when a person values freedom but also longs for belonging. And these small internal conflicts mirror the larger societal struggles playing out on the global stage, reminding us that geopolitics is not separate from psychology, but an extension of it at a massive scale. At the deepest level, this conversation is not about East versus West, democracy versus collectivism, or freedom versus order, but about understanding the human condition, recognizing that we are both individuals and herd animals, both creators and conformists, both innovators and protectors of tradition, and any system that denies one side of this nature will inevitably produce dysfunction, suffering, and instability. Evolutionary psychology helps us understand why this tension is so persistent, because our species survived not by maximizing individual happiness, but by maximizing group survival. And the instincts that supported this survival, such as conformity, hierarchy, and in-group loyalty, remain deeply embedded in our biology, even as modern ideals encourage personal fulfillment. And when these instincts are ignored or denied, they re-emerge in distorted ways, such as nationalism, ideological extremism, or identity-based conflict. Spiritual traditions across cultures have long recognized this tension and attempted to address it not through politics, but through inner awareness, teaching that true freedom does not come from external structures alone, but from understanding the mind's compulsions, fears, and attachments. And when individuals cultivate inner awareness, they become less reactive, less defensive, and less driven by herd mentality, making cooperation possible without enforced conformity. This suggests that the future of societies may depend less on choosing between collectivism and individualism, and more on developing conscious individuals within conscious collectives, people who can think independently without losing empathy, and societies that can maintain cohesion without suppressing creativity. Because when awareness increases, the need for rigid control decreases, and when trust increases, diversity becomes less threatening. The challenge, of course, is that awareness develops slowly, while technology accelerates everything, amplifying fear, spreading misinformation, and magnifying differences faster than human psychology can comfortably process. And without conscious effort, this mismatch can destabilize societies, as we are already seeing across the world, where polarization, mistrust, and fragmentation increase even as connectivity grows. This is why the question of media restraint, education, and cultural narratives becomes so important. Because societies need shared stories that balance individuality with responsibility, creativity with care, and freedom with mutual survival. And without such stories, people retreat into tribes, ideologies harden, and conflict becomes inevitable. Not because people are evil, but because their psychological needs are unmet. Ultimately, the question is not whether collectivism or individualism is better, but how to integrate both in a way that reflects the full complexity of human nature, because survival without creativity leads to stagnation, and creativity without cohesion leads to chaos. And history shows us that civilizations flourish when they find a dynamic balance between these forces, adapting as conditions change rather than clinging to rigid ideals. And perhaps the deepest insight here is that the same awareness we need at the level of nations is the awareness we need within ourselves, the ability to notice when we are acting from fear rather than wisdom, from conformity rather than care, from ego rather than understanding, because societies are ultimately collections of individuals, and the psychological maturity of the collective can never exceed the psychological maturity of its members. And so the work of balancing I and we begins not in policy alone, but in consciousness itself, unfolding quietly within each human being as they learn to belong without disappearing and to stand out without standing against. Thank you for watching. Please share and subscribe for more.